Hello, and thank you for joining us. My name is Shuchi, and I'm delighted to host this conversation with our esteemed group of panelists on a topic that is very important and timely: risk in the age of GenAI. Tell us where you're joining from, and please make sure to chime in with any questions and comments, and we will do our best to address them. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists: Phil Venables, partner Ballistic Ventures and former CISO Google Cloud; Nidhi Luthra, Google Chief InfoSec Global Chief InfoSec Officer at Baxter; our very own Ben DeBont, CISO ServiceNow; and Tarun Luthra, CEO of Vesa, that is also a part of ServiceNow Ventures portfolio. Thank you all for taking the time to join us. All right, let's get started. So the accelerating convergence of AI and digital transformation is fundamentally reshaping the cybersecurity landscape. Can each of you take a little bit, tell us about your mandate and how and if that has shifted since the advent of AI in the last couple of years? Nidhi, maybe I'll start with you. You speak about being asked to do more with a lot less and having to justify clear metrics and ROI. Can you give us some insight on how your outlook as a CISO has changed?
If you had asked me this question even 7 or 8 years ago, and by the way, the approach is not wrong. What I would have said is get all the protections, get all the security, get very broad defenses because more security is better. I'll tell you that I've changed my approach since then. We're now dealing with tighter budgets, heightened accountability, and the need to show return on investment. So my outlook has evolved from broad defenses to very optimized security through a portfolio of investments, which are measured, they are targeted, and they are intelligence informed. The focus is now surgical, where there's measured controls, where every investment can be tied back to a specific risk reduction outcome. The expectation is that every dollar that is being spent does translate into some level of risk reduction, resilience, or business enablement in a way that can easily be explained to leadership and to the board. It's no longer security through smoke and mirrors as the way it used to be in the past. And then I'll also tell you that compliance is a baseline. It's not the end goal. And so true value of cybersecurity must come from quantifiable improvements in risk posture and return back decisions. And so that definitely has become quite a shift in the way I would have done it, years back, where now every proposal must be backed by metrics, benchmarks, and very clear stories that can speak the language or resonate with a CFO or a CEO. I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Tarun, next to you. In your role as an entrepreneur building in the space that's key and top of mind for a lot of large enterprises, can you talk about the current state of identity security and why is it a key pillar for modern cyber strategies?
Absolutely. Again, Shuchi, thank you so much for the opportunity, and it's great to see all the audience joining from throughout the world. Look, if you sort of the two-part question on current state of identity and current state of identity security, our point of view when we started Vesa about 5 years ago was really, it's a highly fragmented. The current world of identity seems to be highly fragmented and fractured. We have tools for identity access management. We have tools for identity governance. We have tools for privilege access. And those problems have existed for the last 2 decades, and over the last, I would say 48 months, maybe 4 years, you have lots more challenges around. You think of posture. You think of identity threats. You think of securing SaaS. You think of now with the world of agents. You start thinking world of agent security. And so, if you think of that old and new. While the world of attacks continue to accelerate, and all of them, if not 80% of them, are rooted in some form of a credential abuse, but the fundamental identity ecosystem has not evolved. And what we fundamentally mean by that, which is, existing identity tools are still living in the world of users and directories, whereas the purest form of access and the purest form to principle of least privileges through permissions and entitlements. So, that's the first part of the question, which is the current state. Highly fragmented, highly fractured, not able to address the old and the new in a platform-centric approach, which is fundamentally built top-down on permissions and entitlements versus users and group. And I would say second part of your question, why this has become a core pillar. Of course, we all saw, Palo Alto buying CyberArk on what 25x multiple of the future, is because, I think the largest cybersecurity company of our era has realized identity is the biggest pillar, one of the core pillars of cyber. And fundamentally why is because, as I said, 80% of attacks are rooted in some form of identity abuse. But I think going back to what Nidhi just alluded to, which is you have to explain back to the CFO and the board and the CEO, and that's rooted in efficiency of these platforms, right? These are very archaic workflow-based tools versus automation, API, and AI and ML. So I can keep going, Shuchi, but let me just pause there.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Very important work for sure. Ben, over to you next. You've been a part of ServiceNow for some time now, and you've seen the company evolve from being an intelligent platform for digital transformation to AI first, and now our aspirations to be AI native. What does that mean for us as a company to deeply integrate security into the Now platform, and anything else that you'd like to share in your experience?
Thanks a lot for everybody that just joined. Ben DeBono, the ServiceNow CISO. I've been at the company 6 years. So for me, AI native means, like in so many cases around security, it's something that isn't bolted on at the end. It's in the DNA of the platform. And as ServiceNow has evolved from digital workflows to AI first and now to AI native, the security challenge has evolved with it. So AI first, we focused on customers using AI safely, applying governance, compliance, and resilience around new features. But being AI native raises the bar. It means that the Now platform itself learns, reasons, and acts with AI at its core. And when AI becomes intrinsic, security has to be intrinsic as well. And so that's why we've been embedding controls directly into the platform fabric. Things like secure model pipelines, provenance and integrity checks for data, policy-driven guardrails for AI agents, and continuous monitoring for adversarial manipulation. But we're not just protecting workflows anymore, which is the core of ServiceNow. Again, we're protecting AI-driven decisions as they happen in real time at scale. And we're trying to build and are building what I like to call trust highways for AI. So safe, governed pathways that allow enterprises to move fast and deploy AI agents with confidence. So for me, AI native plus security means this, that our customers don't just adopt AI, that they adopt trusted AI. And trust is the ultimate differentiator, and trust ultimately is the currency that will define which platforms succeed in this AI-driven economy.
Wonderful. Thank you. Phil, you transitioned from being an operator and practitioner to an investor. How has your shift to VC influenced your view as to where innovation is most needed, especially in AI and cloud security?
Yeah, so I think, one of the things we do at Ballistic is look to invest in companies that we think are going to substantially disrupt the status quo. And it's not just kind of incremental innovation, but broad-based innovation that reimagines whole spaces. And, when I look at that, taking cloud first, you just look across the environment. I think everybody will appreciate this, that most organizations now are inherently multi-cloud. They're a combination of multiple clouds, a combination of SaaS providers, a combination of on-premise infrastructure. And no longer do they, I mean, I would argue they probably didn't want to do this in the first place, but they are increasingly intolerant of having to buy tools to manage each of those silos. They want to be able to take a view of identity and access governance around some of the things that Tarun was talking about. They want to be able to look at configuration. They want to look at vulnerability management. They want to look at policy enforcement across their entire business landscape, irrespective of whether that's running on one cloud or another cloud or on-premise or on a SaaS provider. And so I think that's probably the big theme. And we're starting to see a number of companies emerge that are trying to tackle that problem in more fundamental ways. And then similarly on AI, I think a lot of organizations to date have focused on developing, integrating, or buying products that give them some sense of like an AI firewall or an AI identity or guardrails around the deployment of AI. And ultimately, what I think most organizations want, and there's a few companies starting to be responsive to this, is if you like a control plane for the enterprise for how to not just establish the identity of AI agents, but also to regulate their access, understand the guardrails and operational controls of what they can do, and have that regulated independent from the specific agents so that the CISOs and the technology leaders and business leaders can really understand what AI is doing inside their enterprise and making sure it's appropriately controlled so they can move faster with it and run that as an enterprise control plane.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, I think I've said it in the past. You're all doing God's work. It's really incredible. Thank you for protecting us. But switching gears and kind of taking a step back and talking about the business alignment and setting more context for the audience, how important is it for cybersecurity to be clearly aligned with the business strategy? And what does it take and what are each of you doing to kind of reframe the cybersecurity conversation as a part of strategy? Maybe Ben or Tarun, I'll hand it over to you to kick us off from a product design perspective, embedding security into the product from day one, or anything else that you'd like to share.
Maybe I'll just go briefly, Tarun, if
Yeah.
that's all right.
Yes.
Just on the alignment comment. So it's not optional. It's the job. If security isn't enabling the business strategy, it risks becoming irrelevant. And so here, like so many other companies, our security strategy has to evolve in lockstep with our company's overall strategy. For us, it's our AI native strategy. And so as the platform becomes more intelligent and autonomous, the CISO team's role and that of also of our product and engineering teams as well is to make sure the trust is embedded to every feature so that innovation scales safely. So just as a broad general comment, business alignment isn't just about showing the ROI of security. It's about ensuring that security is the enabler of the company's growth narrative. And again, coming back to AI again, for us, when AI is the growth engine, trust is the fuel.
Mhm.
That was awesome, Ben. It's hard to follow that track, but I would say, Shuchi, from our perspective, a fast growth startup that we're trying to build in a fairly complicated ecosystem where the bar is very, very high, as you heard from Ben. I would say, from our point of view, and again, I'll go back to what Nidhi said, when we go to speak with organizations, Fortune 500, Global 2000, it's all about aligning to business initiatives, right? Not technology and the features and the bells and the whistles. Is what is a business initiative? Is that securing the AI stack? Is a business initiative, a good old digital transformation? But that's number one. Number two, I would say, inherently security for us as an organization is what we call a P0 pillar, where one of my co-founders actually leads platform security. It's that big principle for us that you cannot sort of force fit this later. So I would say both aligning towards the customer to make sure it's aligned towards a business initiative for what problems we want to go solve so that we can add value fast. And number two, inherently, we want to, as Ben alluded to, security has to be the first principle of the product.
Wonderful. Nidhi, can you maybe speak to about any practical advice for the audience as to how are you thinking about it, and especially in a highly regulated industry that you're in?
Happy to. And I'll key off of what both Ben and Tarun just talked about. There's this concept of trust in cybersecurity. I think the most practical advice I can give is control our own narrative, to speak in terms of, so when we present metrics as an example, most security practitioners and CISOs tend to present very technical metrics. It puts us into a technical domain, which is a bit of a disadvantage, really. The metrics, the story that we tell about security should be mapped directly to business objectives. These are growth, customer trust, innovation, and of course, the ability to operate in new markets. That comes through compliance. And so if we present our own story and our metrics in those terms, not how many assets are covered by endpoint protection and how many vulnerabilities do we have in the ecosystem? Sure, those are important, but in terms of how much revenue have we contributed to? Because of cyber, how many markets are we a differentiator in where we have been able to take business away and make it sticky? because of the customer trust that we have generated. If we present ourselves in those terms, we then become a business function and not a technology function. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Phil, you've written about how security leaders can achieve a defender's advantage by being more mindful. Can you speak about that or anything else that you feel is a best practice based on your experience in this space?
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of time we talk about that attackers have an advantage because, defenders always have to be right and attackers don't have to be right ones. So I think in many ways, automation and the use of AI kind of flips that script into the defender's advantage, in that attackers have to remain covert through many different detections, and defenders only have to find them once. And so I think automation substantially changes that. I think as well, when you look back to the conversation we just had about kind of risk management, I'd kind of, echo what everybody was saying, that risk management's about risk to business objectives, and cyber is just one of those risks. And the more you talk about it overall in business objectives, I think that's important. I think one of the things as well we have to remember, and this is why I think it's going to be interesting going forward when you look at cybersecurity products and companies, is ultimately some of our best controls in each space are not just controls that deliver security, they're controls that deliver other business benefits, like software lifecycle controls that deliver quality and reliability as well as security, or identity and access management that not only delivers security but delivers efficiency and timely provisioning of access that enables business operations, or customer authentication improvements that not only reduce fraud and improve security, but also improve customer experience and reduce friction. So I think as we look going forward, a lot of it is about delivering adjacent business benefits along with the security tooling, not just having security tooling doing risk reduction.
Amazing, thank you. So AI is often called a double-edged sword in cybersecurity. There's adversaries that can weaponize it, and there are defenders. In each of your view, is AI tilting the balance in the favor of one versus the other? And how do you outpace, from an innovation perspective, the adversaries in the age of AI? So maybe, Tarun, I'll start with you. We now have to manage not just humans, but also a proliferation of machine accounts, service identities, and even AI agents acting on our behalf. What strategies help maintain visibility and control over who can access what in these complex environments?
Well, thank you, Shuchi. Look, sort of, I think you used a few words there, which are truly, germane to this question, which is, first and foremost, we apply all the security technology and innovations to protect one asset, which is our data, our employee data, our third-party data, our customer data. And that asset, to protect access to that asset, which is our data, our point of view on which we founded this company is we have to root in principle of least privilege. Essentially, the words, who can take what action on what data. And until we understand that deeply, we won't be able to get to these macro frameworks like zero trust, right? So, applying it to AI, to us, the way we're thinking about AI is, look, AI by itself as a technology has no bearing. AI is only successful as long as the data is, right? And AI needs that data set. So, if you think of this modern world of GenAI and agentic and large language models, and now AI apps like GitHub Copilot and so on and so forth, all these systems, the modern systems, need to think least privilege from day one, because we have that opportunity. Before this gets ahead of us, we have this opportunity to define that guardrail, as Phil said, and to operate with that guardrail. So, the way we are thinking about is, look, you have to start again with first principles, address use cases, like as Phil said, what are the agents in my environment? What do these agents have access to? Should they have the access? And, if I'm an employee, I have given access to an agent and I transition, is this agent now a dormant agent, right? So I would say, AI alone will not tilt, data will. Thereby, we have to think about least privilege, who gets access to those large language models from day one. And if you think of the power of agentic, and again, going back to business efficiency that everybody has talked about, it's so high. The potential of the business efficiency is so high that we must operate with AI agents having very strong connotation to authorization permissions.
No, great, thank you. And building on that, Phil, what are the emerging gaps or underserved areas you're particularly seeing in the space, especially when it comes to maybe the intersection of security and AI agents and the other evolving fields where you're excited from a fund perspective or you're advising companies? What are you seeing in the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting what's happening is when you look inside most enterprises on AI, I mean, they're substantially getting a lot of AI technology from the AI companies, the hyperscale cloud providers, the leading SaaS companies like ServiceNow and echoing what Ben said before, a lot of those companies are embedding the right controls, the right guardrails, the right data governance, the right operational controls, and are building substantial amount of trust. But when you flip it around and look at it from most CIO, CTO, or enterprise CISO perspectives, they sit there and look and see there's lots of AI technology deployments, lots of agents appearing, lots of weaknesses in some of the early protocols that are still being worked through, like MCP, and even things that have had more security built in, like A2A and many other protocols. And so it's a very quickly evolving space. And in that space, what most organizations want is to have the observability over what agents and what AI uses are in the environment. And just to answer the question of what identities do they have, what access do they have, what control plane are they operating under, what activities are they doing, where is it coming from, is it inside the enterprise, outside the enterprise, how does it map to my business processes, and then am I controlling it enough to be protected, but deploying it enough to give myself business advantage. And I think that's very challenging for most organizations today. So we're very focused on looking at companies that can deliver that for the enterprise, not just one particular flavor of AI, but really looking at what does it mean for that future to be controlled and observed and well managed and governed and attested to and legally signed off and continuously examined and monitored. And that's a very, very difficult problem when you look at that as a multi-AI, multi-cloud, multi-SaaS, on-premise, mobile, where you've got AI everywhere. How do you observe, manage, and control what it's doing in appropriate ways without getting so fearful that you never actually deploy anything and get any advantage out of it?
No, thank you. Thank you so much, Phil. Ben, I think most of that applies to us as an enterprise. Again, back to our kind of diving deeper into the question of our aspirations to be AI native. Are there any examples that you can share from a feature, functionality, from a ServiceNow perspective, where we've been able to perhaps enhance customer trust and security posture, whether it was a partner or something that we've built internally?
Yeah, sure. There's many examples around that. For me, the one that comes first to mind that is kind of a crossover there is is within our own SecOps or security operations platform. And so what we've done is we've embedded incident summarization powered by generative AI. So instead of analysts wading through pages of logs related to a security incident, the system produces concise, context-aware summaries. It recommends next steps, provides closed case notes, and it really accelerates resolution. And this helps a lot with our 24/7 follow the sun SOC model. So you don't want to waste times and handoffs across time zones around the globe, especially if you're in a crisis situation. And so this capability not only strengthens our security posture with faster containment, but it also helps increase customers' trust that they're actually handling and resolving security incidents quickly and at scale. It also helps with what many of us cybersecurity professionals are addressing today, which is the different notification timelines that exist in different geos around incidents. And so it could be 72 hours, it could be 48 hours, it could be 24 hours, it could be even 1 hour, depending where you are. We've got a number of internal examples, like we use LLMs to risk rank features that we build. We're building a lot of them, and so it allows us to save a lot of time there. Also, any SaaS company, especially a large SaaS company, is going to be dealing with thousands of customer security questionnaires, and they're all just a little bit different. So by using our LLMs, we're able to respond to those in an automated fashion, but also ensuring that the answers are always fresh and accurate. I could go on. We have many other examples. A really basic one that I like is that our red team just used generative AI to develop much more convincing phishing campaigns. But aside from the obvious, I mean, it did raise click rates dramatically, and it wasn't fun for our employees. But what I thought was particularly compelling was that it made it a lot easier and gave us the evidence to secure funding and executive support for a very aggressive passwordless rollout. And so this one I like because it's a clear case where using AI offensively in a controlled way led directly to stronger defensive outcomes. So apologies, you asked for like one example, so I gave you maybe 3 or 4. But I think a lot of these show how we can, turn that use that double-edged sword as an advantage for defenders.
Absolutely. No, thank you. All super relevant. Nidhi, staying with the same topic of AI proliferation, in your role where Baxter operates in a highly interconnected and regulated environment, I'm sure it's even more complex. So what strategies are you implementing to build resilience across your supply chain, your in the digital realm, and especially as it relates to AI?
Thanks. You're absolutely right. Baxter does operate in one of the most interconnected and regulated industries. And the adoption of AI, which we are with arms wide open, we are adopting in several ways similar to what Ben described, whether it's in security operations or even in making our product development more efficient and safer. Resilience, though, it gets introduced because of that double-edged sword that you talked about. While we are strengthening our defenses and our efficiency, there is an inherent risk that is getting introduced because of the use of AI in itself. And so resilience is now becoming, the way we're thinking about resilience is changing. We're approaching it through a couple of strategies specific to your question around supply chain and supply chain trust and transparency. We're moving towards a model where we're no longer vetting our suppliers just once a year. We are going into continuous visibility into our third-party ecosystem. We are adopting concepts like risk tiering vendors. We are monitoring their digital footprint, and we are integrating security clauses into our contracts that go beyond just compliance. We are actually looking into things like sharing liability and tying resilience back to patient safety, which is one of our core tenets at Baxter. Resilience is no longer about just bouncing back after an incident. It's about helping Baxter innovate. And so to that end, use AI, our digital supply chains, and our connected ecosystems, do so in a manner that brings about confidence and trust. So with AI proliferating across our business as well, we are establishing guardrails similar to what Phil talked about for responsible use, ensuring that our models are explainable, that our data is protected, and that our decisions remain transparent, given some of the regulations that are coming about as well. Data transparency is becoming more and more critical.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all again for breaking it down. It's a very complex topic and almost impossible to make sense of the depth and breadth of it. So I really appreciate that. But back to the topic of governance and policy. With the rapid AI adoption and companies racing to deploy generative AI and machine learning, governance sometimes, I feel like, struggles to keep up. I could be wrong, but I would love to hear your thoughts on where do you think we are in that governance maturity when it comes to AI? All right, who wants to kick? Phil, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. So, I think what was interesting about this, and this is some of the work I did with my colleagues in my prior role at Google, is one of the reasons we developed the Google Secure AI framework was really off the back of all the experience we'd had inside Google of managing a whole set of governance, compliance, and security risks in building all of the AI systems. And one of the things we wanted to try and do was to embed those into products and also educate organizations as they were developing their own approaches to governance. And it's a pretty comprehensive framework. It's now out. We kind of handed it off to the Coalition for Secure AI, an open foundation. But really, when you strip all the detail away, it's really just kind of 3 pillars of governance. First is AI governance is all about software lifecycle risk. It's the management of the models, the management of the integration of models with software, the management of the tool sets, the management of the agents. It's a very, very big software lifecycle problem. And if you govern it like that, many risks become well managed. Secondly, it's a very big data governance problem. The training data, the fine-tuning data, the model parameters, the integrity of the data that the AI models interact with, whether it's for RAG or for other purposes, but ultimately not just for security, but also for privacy, compliance, safety, trust, understanding the lineage of the data, the integrity of the data that trains, tunes, and operates the models becomes vital. And then the third and final big pillar is all of the operational risk mitigations. So that's the guardrails, the circuit breakers, the controls around what models can do, independent checks and balances to make sure that the models are working effectively in a particular business context. And so really there's lots and lots and hundreds of controls in all the different frameworks, but fundamentally, I think if you look at this as a governance problem of software lifecycle, of data governance, and for the management of deployed operational risks, usually everything ties up to that. And I think there's a lot of platform tooling and other products being built to deliver on those governance objectives.
Great, thank you. Ben, maybe over to you next. Anything?
Yeah, I think what Phil said is a fantastic approach. I also think that governance is where a lot of organizations are struggling right now. So I think that many in a rush as they adopt these AI technologies are treating governance for AI as a compliance exercise. So box ticking to satisfy regulators is an example, and I think that misses the point. So governance done right, it's not about avoiding penalties. It can be a strategic advantage. It can build trust. It can accelerate adoption. And in the case of AI, I think it separates responsible AI leaders from laggers. So my kind of generalized perspective is don't think of governance as dragging innovation. Think of it as enabler. If your team trusts the guardrails internally, they're going to move faster, not slower. And I think it's similar with your customers too. If they trust how you're governing AI, they'll adopt your AI technologies faster. And that's the maturity curve that I feel that we're on, shifting governance from a checkbox to a growth accelerator.
That's great, thank you. Nidhi, is there any practical advice grounded in your own experience as a leader in this space? For instance, you talk about governance groups and anything else that comes to mind that you might be able to share.
Sure. From my own experience, my suspicion is that most organizations are still sort of in the early to middle stages of maturity when it comes to AI governance. We've acknowledged the risks. Several of us have formed governance groups. Most of us are now trying to operationalize it in a way where we're not stifling innovation, like Ben just talked about. So a few practical things that stand out for me from my own experience. One, I can tell you our board often gives us feedback. The question that I've been asked a few times is, are you using the same level of scrutiny for a small AI use case versus a very large one? Can your governance and your sort of inspection model pivot so that you're not leaning in as heavily for something that's perhaps a smaller or a less risky use case? So I think that flexibility does need to be brought in. We're still figuring that out ourselves. Second thing I'll tell you is that the idea of governance is it's not a committee, it's a way of being, it's an operating model. The companies that are doing this well, the ones that are truly leveraging it to innovate, are those where it's no longer just a quarterly council meeting, as Ben just said. That then becomes a compliance check the box exercise. It's a start, but it isn't enough. Where it really works well is when it's embedded directly into the life cycle of product development, where there truly it becomes like quality or any other oversight guidance model along the way. And then the last thing I'll say is there are several frameworks and not one size fits all. Where we've seen value is in blending. Really, our internal AI playbooks are a translation of all those frameworks into business-friendly guardrails.
Wonderful, thank you. Tarun, I'm going to double click on the topic of data in the age of AI for you. And as it spreads across multi-cloud environments and AI systems, How should companies rethink identity and data security and privacy?
Yeah, no, thank you, Shuchi. I think just going back to, I think Phil has a phenomenal framework that he outlaid, which is, if you look at going back to governance, I just wanted to say one thing, which is, I think, AI is running. I feel governance is jogging. I think we are at that framework right now. It feels to me, but as both Ben and Nidhi said, for organizations, governance can be a strategic lever rather than, a drag. So just to go back to your question on entitlements and identity and data, look, the way we think of the AI stack, right, which is the most bottom layer is, of course, infrastructure, but let's forget about vector databases for a second. The most fundamental layer is large language models, right? So we have to go back to, just like we want to understand who has access to what in SQL Server or who can do what in Oracle, we really need to have those controls built for large language models that Phil alluded to, right? Who can take what action on large language models. The second layer, the way we think about is AI apps, just like we had SaaS apps back in 2010. And the rapid rise of, think of a Cursor, think of a GitHub Copilot, think of a Lovable, right? These are very modern AI apps which are resulting in high efficiency for organizations like a Baxter. But, we cannot, we have to think about embedding identity access right now from early on into this modern framework with a modern architecture, right? It cannot be, let me bring Active Directory for AI apps, right? That's not going to be the answer for these things. You have to really start afresh and go back to your question of data security within those apps is going to be about strong access controls, strong principle of least privilege in AI apps. And the third layer, which is what personally the one that we're very excited with, and I think it resonates very much with what Ben said for ServiceNow, is agents itself, right? So every function of Vesa that was possibly 2 years ago a form that somebody had to fill, we're rapidly converting them into agents, right? Because again, going back to what Nidhi said, that has to be about business efficiency. So, but now if you think about agents, I don't think, there's something, working very closely with Phil and a few other folks, is there doesn't exist a single piece of art on what should agent identity be, or what are the principles of agent identity access. That thought doesn't exist out in the industry, right? People are talking about it, but it doesn't exist. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity in all the layers, just to summarize, from large language models to AI apps to agents themselves, autonomous agents, human to agent, agent to agent. There's a lot of good innovation ahead of us to build identity access controls with the mindset of least privilege.
Great. Can I layer another question as to how are you bringing, you especially, and all of us, I feel like, work with large enterprises, legacy systems, like how do you bring them along in the journey? Are there?
I can kick it off, but Phil, feel free to, if you have a very large perspective. Look, the way we are engaging with organizations is going back to where you started, Shuchi, business initiatives. We cannot speak technology for the speak of technology. I think we have to tie what is the key business initiative, what is that OKR, what is that KPI, and speak that language. And governance and compliance and access controls become a part of that discussion, right? Rather than let me start bottoms up and then figure out where do we fit. Phil, I don't know if you.
Yeah, I think I always kind of view that data governance, identity, and access management as actually being one of the prime business enablers. And it's amplified in AI, because when you look across most large organizations, they've got massive silos of data that in some cases they haven't brought together because they're fearful of what happens when they bring it together, because it might break some compliance rule with some information barrier. It might be too much of a big target of a data repository for them, or individual business lines might not want to share access and control to that. And ultimately, the answer to that is you still have to bring it together to drive what your business needs to do, but deploying an appropriate access control layer over that means that you get the benefit of pooling data while still preserving the security and integrity and privacy of how you brought it in the first place. And then when you overlay a set of emerging technologies like privacy preserving computation, multi-party computation, a whole range of technologies, and then layer that with things like confidential computing, you're able to still bring data together, get the value out of it, while still managing the risk appropriately of bringing all that data together. So I think access management and associated technologies are the prime example of business enablers when you're facing a world like most organizations do, where you have to bring more data together and get rid of some of the data silos that you've had in the past.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you. Ben or Nidhi, anything to add there? Any on that? Okay.
No, I'd say Phil is absolutely right. At least with Baxter, I can tell you from my experience, or when you speak of legacy, our biggest challenge is truly pockets of legacy data that are sitting across the company. And what this has forced us to do is look at the hygiene of our data. And from everything from the retention, how long we were keeping it, to the actual integrity of the data itself, because that is what will produce results, either good or bad. And so we've had to go back to the fundamentals to get it right.
Great. Thank you. Awesome. All right. Well, another important topic that I hear people talk about is the expanding CISO mandate. So the role of CISO has broadened dramatically. Some say today CISOs are effectively becoming chief digital risk officers who influence the enterprise strategy and oversee areas like privacy, safety, and AI ethics. Do you agree with that characterization, or how are you seeing it within your peers, among your peers, or anything in the industry they can speak to? Maybe Ben?
Sure, I'll go.
Yeah.
So I think that statement's been true for many years, for decades, in fact. And I think the CISO mandate has certainly expanded and changed. You've got technology CISOs, you've got compliance CISOs. Today, I think it's more about a business-related CISO, similar to what Phil was talking about at the start of the call. Because in that business orientated CISO approach, it's where you kind of see CISO organizations that are influencing and activating business functions outside of what might be the traditional CISO mandate. And so an example, maybe different from the ones Phil gave, but an example that's very similar that I've seen for years is that secure coding can often lead to more efficient coding. That thoughtful architectural design, because of security views, can result in more robust architectural design. And I think this is important because the threats we face today, they don't respect potential silos that you might create within your own business, like security or privacy or ethics or even resilience. Everything is connected. And if the CISO isn't influencing these conversations, or the CISO organization, there's a gap at the table. And so at ServiceNow, a lot of my time is not spent on, say, security operations and application reviews, but also privacy, AI governance, and especially customer assurance. And so we're moving into a world where the CISO isn't just defending standard tech, but shaping the digital risk posture of the company as a whole. And it's a bigger mandate, but it's also a bigger opportunity to influence enterprise strategy and to make trust a true differentiator in the market.
Great.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, I think, one of the things that you see as well is, apart from maybe some of the large banks that have, a tradition of managing the risks of AI models in the traditional deep learning sense, machine learning sense, there's and I've also got pretty deep privacy and compliance practices outside of those, and some other large regulated organizations. In most other organizations, you see the CISO team approaching AI from a security point of view, and then the board and the CEO and the general counsel and others look around the table and go, well, who's going to take care of the privacy issues, the compliance issues, the customer trust issues, the ethics, safety, bias control, all of those things. And they look to the CISO to do that because, quite frankly, there's nobody else with that broad role across the enterprise, the technical ability, the business alignment, the alignment to controls, the history of having managed all of these things from a security perspective. And so I think for most CISOs in most organizations with the drive of AI, they're having to become chief digital risk officers, whether they want to or not. They're being asked to do it by their organizations, which is which is actually a great outcome. Like Ben said, for the evolution of the CISO has been becoming more business oriented because of what the CISOs want to do, and now it's also because of what the business leaders want to do, because they see the CISO as being the prime enabler to do AI in an appropriately risk managed way, and that's way more than just the security.
Great, thank you. Nidhi, anything to add or build on that?
Very similar comments. 10 years ago, the CISO was primarily focused on protecting infrastructure. Today, I'm increasingly being asked to weigh in on privacy and data ethics. I sit on an AI council. I'm asked to weigh in on safety and resilience, especially given we're in the healthcare sector. Digital risk is very much being viewed as enterprise risk. So while the title might still be Chief Information Security Officer, and I think I read a statistic a few weeks ago where I think it said 42% of CISOs now report outside of IT. So the more matured and maturing organizations have begun to realize that it's not just a technical function anymore. This is truly an enterprise risk concept, and it needs to be positioned in a way where the role can balance innovation, compliance, trust, and embed it all in the in the enterprise strategy itself.
Tarun, as someone serving the CISOs and the risk orgs, are you seeing anything? Are you hearing your stakeholders kind of mandates changing or?
Yeah, no, I think everything that I think Ben and Phil and Nidhi, I think, covered very well. But I would say, or at least what we are experiencing, Shuchi, is and something that I've discussed with Phil, at least in my experience, a lot of CISOs being asked to also play the role of a chief technology officer for an organization, right? I think that keeps coming up. It has now become a trend, Ben, that I keep hearing is chief information security officer being such a technical role and such as, again, a high bar for the organization. Again, trust was the word that was used, is in the hands of the CISO. And so, one of the trends we definitely see is, risk continues to be the second line, and risk continues to be a dedicated pillar outside of the realm of chief information security officer. And again, please keep in mind, we're very focused on Fortune 500, Global 2000. The second part is, those organizations are requesting CISOs to also, hey, why don't you be the CTO of the organization, right? Which I think is I consider very healthy, actually, very progressive.
It's a good data point. Great, thank you. Awesome. Well,
to me, digital risk is just part of the CISO.
Well, maybe we'll. Thanks, Arun. Maybe before we move to audience questions, I see some have come in. One last topic that I'd love to talk about is talent. And cybersecurity talent remains in critical short supply. And again, correct me if I'm wrong. You guys are practitioners. You see it on a daily basis. And what, meanwhile, economic pressures are forcing teams to justify, like you mentioned, Nidhi, every investment. How are you addressing the talent challenge within your organizations? And I think we have a question that came in, which is along the same lines of what role do you see AI playing in it? And any practical tips for fellow security leaders to help prevent teams from burning out?
I can start with this one, if you like. It is absolutely one of the toughest parts of the cyber equation today. I'm constantly trying to get creative, even within my own operating models, on whether I should be insourcing, whether I should, rely more on managed service. And I'm now finding that the managed services are also dealing with the same issue, where talent is just there's an incredible skills shortage. Couple of things that we are doing. AI is being used to amplify our skills, not replace it. We are absolutely leaning on AI for some of the more commodity-based tasks like triage, anomaly weighting and detection, and some of the more basic reporting. So our in-house teams can focus on high-value work, things like strategy analysis, something that's a little bit more sexy than wading through 60,000 alerts every day. We are trying to actively at any given time avoid burnout. We're doing it through recognition and through balance. It is a real challenge. And so here again, using AI, we're able to have shorter shifts. We're able to have more meaningful staffing, fewer people on shifts, but complemented with tools and technology, just so that they're not sitting through very, very intense work all the time. Essentially, before I hand the mic over to someone else, we're heavily investing in automation where it does make sense, and we're making it a part of our culture. Certainly, it's a journey. We're not there yet, but those are some of the things we're doing right now.
Great. All right, maybe Ben, you want to chime in?
Yeah, sure. I mean, certainly agree with Needy. I think that, AI is a great force multiplier. It's not going to replace your team. It's going to amplify them. So for us, very similar, and like the example I gave, it's cutting out the noise. So our analysts don't spend their nights chasing false positives or us answering the same security questionnaire for the 500th time. That's where burnout happens. So my advice is let AI take the pain out of the work and give your people the parts that matter. And I think this is good for retention and how you may be able to keep your team hopefully ahead of attackers. I would say, because I noticed that there's a lot of ServiceNow CISO org employees on this call. Whenever I get asked for resources, my first thought is, can you build a ServiceNow workflow to automate it? And the second thing is, can you use AI technologies to do the same? And so we're going to be embracing that a lot more forcefully moving forward.
Phil?
Yeah, well, look, I agree with everything that's been said. I mean, AI is, it's an amplifier of productivity. It's a democratizer of talent. In other words, it can make inexperienced people operate at a higher level because it provides them with assists. One of the things I'd also kind of point out, and this was kind of my experience at Google, was even though there are some specific use cases that are very transformational, whether it's on reviewing software for vulnerabilities or generating secure configurations, a whole array of things that are in and of themselves add a huge amount of productivity, we shouldn't also neglect the stacked benefits of little improvements in workflows. I mean, one of the things we'd written a lot about at Google was just significant productivity improvements in analyzing incidents and issues, in some of the stuff Ben mentioned, in doing vendor assessments, a whole array of things that in and of themselves they don't look that like cool and interesting, but when you add them all up, they represent a 10x productivity boost for teams. So I think in our hunt for transformational uses of AI, we shouldn't neglect the stacked benefits of lots of incremental improvements using AI.
Right. Awesome. Tarun, anything to add there? Or
I think we're good. I think everybody's covered. Good.
all right. I might have lied. I have one last question before we move to the audience Q&A. What advice would you give to CISOs and your peers and business leaders for how to be ready for tomorrow's security landscape? Just spend 30 seconds each. Ben.
Okay. Mindset. So thinking ahead of aligning whatever your strategy is with the business, but more important that what is your customer base, and not restricting yourself not restricting yourself so that you're not imaginative about what attackers could do, imaginative about what your teams could achieve, and kind of drive that mindset into your organizations and across your partner teams. And in cybersecurity, those partner teams are essential.
Right. Nidhi.
I'll repeat something I said early on. Organizations that thrive will not be the ones that have the most amount of defenses or controls. It'll be the ones that can speak in terms of what the business wants to hear: growth, trust, revenue.
Right. Phil?
I would say for most organizations, it's just being curious and looking at the things that come after what comes next and be prepared for that. And so while we're focused on this first wave of AI, look at what's going to come next. Trillions of agents deployed, massive amounts of new vulnerabilities discovered, massive amounts of new software being generated, but at the same time, massive amounts of productivity boost from AI technologies. So I think if you think, imagine what the world is going to look like in 24 months, then start preparing for that now.
Wonderful. Tarun?
I would say old and new. Don't forget about the old, as the new world is coming of AI and is already here and accelerating. We have to take, something Nidhi alluded to earlier, which is, this has only exposed how bad the old is. and we must think of this something old, something new is a framework that I use. And you have to think with that mindset. I love that word, Ben, which is you cannot let go of the old as we are addressing the new, which is only accelerating probably at the fastest rate we've ever seen. So
great. Thank you all. All right, maybe we'll take a few questions. And I think we probably have touched on every single, perhaps topic, most of the topics, but anything to add to the future of guardrails evolving in the context of increasing agent autonomy? Any practical advice there? So the question is, how is the future of guardrails evolving in the context of increasing agent autonomy?
Yeah, well, so I think, just very quickly, I think while you need to build guardrails into agents and equip them with the privileges needed, no more, no less, of what an agent needs to do, I think you also need to have independent guardrails, whether it's through MCP servers or how they interact with other agents or API gateways, so that even if an agent thinks it's permissioned to, I don't know, wire $50 million outside of your organization, your good old-fashioned payments gateway should probably regulate what anything's allowed to be done, whether it's an agent or a person. And so having independent checks and balances for critical controls is going to continue to be important, even if you think you've got a really well-engineered control process for embedding privilege into agents.
Right. Anyone else wants to add anything?
Yeah, I think the way I look at it, especially what Phil said, I think it's not just about protecting traditional systems. It's very different now with agents because it's ensuring the integrity and accountability of machine-made decisions. And so I think that's a massive risk and opportunity at the same time, where you can build trust into these systems.
Great. All right. I think we've addressed the talent shortage question. So the next one is, do you think public companies should include an independently assessed risk factors / score for the organization so that consumers / investors can make their investment decisions accordingly? Any thoughts on that one?
I can take a go at that one. That's a good question. The reason I didn't answer the previous one was because I was thinking about this one. I jumped ahead, not gonna lie. But I think there's something to be said about transparency, don't get me wrong. I think it is important that organizations have healthy mechanisms for disclosure, have mechanisms through which they're transparent, and there are existing ways of doing that today. I struggle with the idea of a single independent scoring system because an organization's risk is constantly changing, and it's not the same as a different organization's risk. Or even the way it is calculated. So I do struggle with the idea of one independent sort of assessment mechanism. It is not an apples to apples comparison. So I think it could be potentially misleading in that regard.
Great. Any other thoughts before we move to the next one? All right. So there's a bunch of questions. I'm just going to pick one, and maybe Tarun or anyone else. How do you attach identity to agents? Say the Fidelity agent you will use instead of a website. Anything?
Yeah, no, this, we discussed a lot about this topic. It's agent identity. I guess 3 points quickly. Agent identity is a seminal field. I think we all have an opportunity to go define that, to go define what will agent identity mean, because it certainly won't be a user identity sitting in Active Directory. That won't happen. Number two, there are a lot of new constructs and frameworks being designed. Like, I'll give you an example. GitLab recently, about 3 months ago, announced the concept of composite identity. And the whole rationale behind that entity definition is Nidhi, as a developer, gives access to an agent to check and code on her behalf. And that's, a net new construct that never existed, even 6 months ago. So I think there are new frameworks being developed, like, as I said, composite identity that we all need to embrace. And number three, I would say, as we think about agents and again, back to governance and data security and all those good concepts, is let's not forget about principle of least privilege, right? Let's not make the sins of the past again. And so, when we think of identity is not your username and a group name and a directory name. Identity is actually what your permissions and entitlements are. Those are the 3 key points that come to my mind.
Awesome. Well, as much as I'd love to take all the questions and continue the conversation, this brings us sadly to the end of our session. But thank you all again for taking the time to share your insights. Thank you to our audience for joining us. Reach out to us with any questions, and really appreciate everyone taking the time. Thank you again. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.